The more you try to control your anxiety, the more you try to push away your panic attacks, the more you try to struggle and attack your depression, the worse it's going to get. There is a saying that what you resist persists. And this all made sense. This light bulb moment went off. And I was like, this is the stuff I could not find anywhere. Through all the books that I read, so many books, through all the books I read, through all the websites I went to, through all the videos I watched, this is the one thing I did not find anywhere. And this is where the healing process began. I want to run through the things that I started to do that slowly, took a long time, but slowly I started to see some signs of hope. So let's jump into what I started to do at those points when I was in the darkest days of my life. On this month, exactly 6 years ago, I had my very first panic attack. And later in the month, I was diagnosed with Generalized Anxiety Disorder. And then the journey began. For 2 years after that, I went through the darkest days of my life with anxiety disorder, panic attacks, depression, and not really knowing where that light at the end of the tunnel is going to be. And 6 years later, as I look back at where I was and where I am now, it is absolutely life-changing. And May is Mental Health Awareness Month. And also, this is the 40th episode of the Abundant Desi podcast. And over the last several months, I've been asked over and over again. As a matter of fact, from day one, I've been asked to share my anxiety disorder story, my depression story, and how I overcame it. And this is the best time to do it. And this is probably going to be one of the most important, most life-changing episodes that I've personally recorded, but for you to listen to as well. Now, even if you do not struggle with anxiety disorder or panic attacks or depression or anything mental health related, I highly encourage you to listen to this episode multiple times, because there is going to be someone in your family, whether there is right now or in the future, or you as well may have to deal with mental health issues. And I promise you that this is a very important dialogue. It's a very important conversation, and there's still a stigma around this, especially in the Desi community. So please listen in, take notes. But before I jump into this episode, a really important disclaimer, something that I absolutely need to include before we jump in, just because I want you to be aware of this. I'm sharing my personal story, and these are things that I went through and how I overcame it and where I am today. I want to disclaim by saying that I am not a therapist, I am not a psychiatrist, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a doctor. I am simply sharing my personal story and how I've overcome it. I'm sharing it from the person who has gone through it, from my perspective. The tips and tricks and tools that I'm going to share in this episode may be an amazing foundation for you to begin your recovery journey as well. And recovery isn't even the word that I want to use. By the end of this episode, you'll know what I mean by that. So for you, your story is going to be completely different. If you're going through anxiety disorder, depression, or panic attacks, please know that for every single person, you are extremely unique, and your situation and story is going to be unique as well. You may have a mild version of what I had, or you may have an extreme version. Everything that I'm going to share with you is how I overcame and conquered my anxiety disorder and depression in a very natural way. But I'm going to share this from the beginning and tell you how this began and how I went through it and where I am today, and show you a little bit of hope by the end of this. And by the way, in the last 5 minutes of this particular episode, I'm going to share with you a very important message that I think is going to completely redefine how you look at your panic attacks and your anxiety and your depression. If you take anything out of what I'm about to talk to you about, please listen in, especially at the last 5 minutes. Again, share this with a loved one, share this with someone who really needs it, and listen to this as many times as you need, because this story that I'm about to share and my personal journey is going to really help you get through a lot. Okay? So without further ado, let's get started. Let's start from the beginning, okay? Now, ever since my earliest memory, I have always been a creative human being. From a very early age, I always wanted to create. I was never into sports. I was never into socializing. It was always about creating, whether it was artistically, illustrating, drawing, whatever I could do, or just expressing myself through the arts. And when I say arts, this is growing up in Pakistan. We didn't have school plays. We didn't have theater. We didn't have any of those things. I was able to just do what I could with what I had. And when we immigrated to America, And when my dad got me my first camera, I've shared the story before, we started creating silly music videos, Bollywood recreations, and the years kept going and I just kept becoming more and more creative. My creative muscle was building every single day. I am a creative at heart, and creativity is something that exudes through me on a daily basis, and it is an honor to be able to use the creativity to be in a career that I'm able to do this every single day. By career, I mean my own production studio alongside my wife and being able to work with amazing clients, some of who are listening to this podcast. So thank you so much for being a part of this family and allowing Manowar Studios to be a part of your life as well. And the reason I'm talking about creativity today is it is very important to realize that anxiety, depression, and panic attacks, it does not have a bias. It does not prefer one over the other. It can happen to anyone, okay? But creatives are more prone to anxiety, depression, and panic attacks. And there's a big reason for this, and I didn't understand this from the beginning, and I understood this later on. And the reason creatives are very anxious human beings is because there is a part of your brain that is designed and dedicated to being creative. And that is the part of your brain that kind of flares up when anxiety kind of looms into your world. And it is the reason that anxiety does go a little bit more closer to creatives. Because if for those of you who don't know what it's like to be an anxious person or when you're having a panic attack, your anxious brain is overstimulated and you're thinking about the worst possible case scenario. That's saying impending doom or feeling like the end of the world is happening. That is what you're going through when panic attacks are happening. And these are things I didn't know, okay, until I had my first panic attack. I didn't know, I had heard about these things, but I didn't know what it felt like. But creative human beings tend to overanalyze because they use the creative part of their brain, and that is where they kind of go down the rabbit hole. So I spent my whole life, I've always been creative. And then, when I finally got into a place in my life where there was a lot of pressure in all different elements of my life, a lot of pressure career-wise, a lot of pressure with my future, and not knowing where I wanted to go, my anxious brain started to overfill. And it's just like a cup, when you fill a cup up with water and then it overfills and it spills over. That is when anxiety just unfolds and it comes literally out of the blue. That's exactly what happened. 6 years ago, on this month in May, oddly enough, May being Mental Health Awareness Month, 6 years ago, I was leaving my parents' house. I was going back home, and I was driving, and it was really hot. It was a really hot day in the middle of May here in Iowa. And I was driving home, and I had felt off pretty much the entire day. And when I say I felt off, I just felt like I was very disoriented and disconnected, and I just did not feel aligned. Even when I was talking to my dad before I left, I was talking to him, I was listening to him, but nothing was really registering in my brain. It's as if I was on a totally different dimension, a different universe, a multiverse. And as I was driving home, the heat was, hitting me, and I had the windows rolled down, and I just felt really uncomfortable. And as I was sitting at a stop sign, all of a sudden, this feeling started kind of tingling in the back of my head. And these thoughts started coming up in the back of my head. These thoughts like, what if I'm not good enough? What if my future is completely doomed? What if I don't know what I'm going to do in life? What if I'm a complete failure? And all these negative thoughts started coming in, and then those negative thoughts turned into horrific situations, like scary situations, like thoughts of death, thoughts of suicide. And by the way, I had never dealt with depression before then, but all these really scary thoughts. And as these scary thoughts started looming in, my creative light bulb just went off. And I started coming up with creative things about all these horrible, awful things. And when I say this, it's really hard to explain unless you've gone through this, but all these horrible thoughts started rushing my brain. And these thoughts started to scare me. Okay, these thoughts started to scare me, and I was in a state of fear. And immediately that fight or flight component kicks in. And if you don't know what fight or flight means, human beings, when there were saber-toothed lions around, when we were hunter-gatherers, unlike today, there's technology, we live in an informational revolution period, we were always on the lookout for predators. And if you saw a predator, you either fought it or you ran away, right? And so in current times, there are no saber-toothed lions. We are not fighting off tigers and lions and all this stuff. We're in current times, right? And so fight or flight is inherent. It is part of our DNA. It is genetically connected to our brain, and it always has been. And so fight or flight kicked in. And because I was sitting in a car in the middle of traffic on a really, really, really hot day, immediately instead of fighting, the flight kicked in. and that water started to spill over in that cup, and boom, I started having a panic attack. For those of you who've never had a panic attack, this is what it feels like. Imagine you're on a roller coaster at an amusement park, and the roller coaster is going up and your heart is slowly starting to race. And then boom, that first drop happens and adrenaline just literally shoots through your veins, and you are in this moment and exhilarated and excited. So much thrill, so much love, so much joy. Everything is happening. All these endorphins are releasing. That is what panic attack feels like, but you're just sitting there doing nothing. Imagine sitting there and just a shot of adrenaline, a very scary, joyous, a very scary, thrilling, bizarre sensation kicks in, but it's frightful. And immediately followed by that, your heart starts racing. I could literally feel my heart kind of pulsating through my neck. I could feel it through my chest. I just felt the blood just surging through me. I could just feel it all. I felt very much like all my senses were extremely heightened. And then along with my heart rate, I felt extremely sweaty. I just felt like I was about to pass out. But then as I was feeling I was going to pass out, my brain was racing. Like racing, 100 miles an hour. I felt like I was thinking about everything. And then as I was thinking, I immediately started thinking, am I going crazy? I felt like I was going crazy. I felt like I was having a heart attack. I felt numbness in my face and my body. And immediately the first thing that I thought of, because again, if you've never had panic attacks, what you do know is things that you hear all the time: symptoms of a heart attack, symptoms of a stroke, symptoms of this and that. My very first thought was, I am having a heart attack. And that is the biggest thing people say who've had an anxiety or panic attack, is they feel like they're having a heart attack. I couldn't get home fast enough. I got home, I got out of the car, I went inside, and I just felt so, and I just laid down. I laid down and I called Crystal, and I was like, when you get home, we need to go to the ER. I'm having a heart attack. And she raced home, and by the time she got home, I had kind of calmed down a little bit and my heart rate slowed down. But that feeling of unease was still present, right? And I told her, I'm like, you know what, I think I'm doing okay. And I could feel my heart rate. I was checking my pulse and it was slowly coming down. And I didn't know what had happened to me. And I just thought maybe it was a fluke, maybe it was just the hot weather, I don't know. But that's when the true journey started. There is this lingering sensation after you've had a panic attack that kind of lingers for a couple days after. And for a few weeks, I felt so on edge. I felt so disconnected. And there's a part of panic attacks and anxiety disorder known as disassociative, feeling like you're not part of this realm. It feels like you're floating. If you've ever woken up from a nap, the best way to explain this is if you've ever taken a nap in the middle of the day and you end up sleeping longer than you wanted to, and a loved one wakes you up and you're like, what time is it? And they're like, it's 11. You're like, I've been sleeping for 24 hours. They're like, no, you've been sleeping for 30 minutes. You just feel extremely disconnected. That's what it felt. That's what it felt like all the time. I just felt completely disconnected with the world around me. I couldn't understand what people were saying. I couldn't understand myself. I was saying words, but I felt like I needed to understand every single word that was coming out of my mouth. Just like Christopher, do you understand the words that are coming out of my mouth? I felt like every word I had to really think about the next thing I was going to say. I couldn't even hold a conversation, but other people didn't even realize this. People thought they were like, that I was totally fine and normal, but to me, I thought I was going crazy. A couple of weeks later, I had another panic attack. This one was as worse as the first one. And I was like, okay, I am having a heart attack again. So we ended up going to the ER, and they said that about 60 or 70% of people that go to the ER with complications or symptoms of a heart attack are actually having a panic attack. And so the doctor there at urgent care, we ended up not going to ER, but we went to urgent care. The doctor told me that I was having an anxiety panic attack. And so they set me up with an EKG. They just tested my heart. They checked the electrolytes, and they checked everything, the blood flow of my heart. They did a full scan. They did all these things, and they were like, yeah, your heart is extremely healthy. You should go to your family doctor and get a clean-up bill of health. And that's my first tip for those of you who are listening. If you feel like something is wrong, if you feel like you're having anxiety attacks or panic attacks, or you feel like something is wrong, just go to the doctor, get a clean bill of health. Meaning, do your blood work, have them do a urine test, have them do an EKG. If you have to pay out of your pocket, just do it. It's better to know that everything is okay than not. But something very interesting happened. This is where the next part of the battle started. I had the EKG, I had blood work done, I had urine tests done, and they did everything, and they came back and they said, you have a clean bill of health, you are extremely healthy, All your blood work, everything, you are unbelievably healthy. In fact, you're one of the healthiest people we've seen in a long time. Go home and just rest. I was like, okay, this is okay. So I'm not having a heart attack. This is nothing. I started looking up what panic attack and all this stuff meant, but I still wasn't sinking in. This is where the scariest thing happened that I never imagined would happen. So I got home and I was laying down after this appointment. I was just fatigued. I was exhausted. I couldn't even think. And I was laying there and I was taking deep breaths, trying to figure out what the heck to do. And then I started thinking about what the doctor said, saying, you have a clean bill of health. You're perfectly healthy. And for a moment, for a split second, I felt this ease. And then immediately, my creative brain took over again. And my brain started thinking, wait a minute, if I am completely healthy, then do I have a tumor? Do I have brain cancer? Is there something absolutely deadly that is going on with me that the doctors didn't catch? What if the doctors were wrong? They need to run the tests again. The tests were wrong, they were wrong, everyone's wrong, and then boom, 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 anxiety starts kicking in, my heart is fluttering, and within 2 seconds, full-on panic attack again. I was in tears. I've never shared this with anyone. I was in tears as this was happening because I did not know what was going on with me. What is going on with me? Why is this happening to me? A couple of months ago, I was completely fine. I wasn't even worrying about this stuff. Now I can't even get up and walk around. I can't even talk to people. This outgoing human being who is like in his, living his life. I can't even talk to people. I can't even create. I was creatively exhausted. I was physically drained, mentally fatigued. I was done for. I didn't know what was going on with me. Life felt like it was coming to an end. And then that is when the grieving process started. Depression kicked in. Grieving is not just when someone passes away. It's not when just you lose someone. Grieving happens, personally, I feel like it happens after you had an anxiety disorder attack or panic attack, or even like being diagnosed with any kind of illness. It is that process you go through of acceptance and loss and depression. And this is when my depression started. This was like the darkest times of my life. I could not get out of bed. It sucked getting out of bed. It sucked getting up in the morning. I hated going to sleep at night because I didn't know I didn't want to wake up the next day. And as a matter of fact, going to sleep was impossible. I would fall asleep for like maybe, I fall asleep at like a couple of minutes at a time. And then I would wake up with shots of adrenaline running through me. I had so much adrenaline and energy just rushing through me, and not good energy either. This was like the scary panic attack styled dose of energy, okay? And I was susceptible to everything. And I got to a point where I just was overanalyzing every single thing. Every time I had a panic attack, what did I do that day? Who did I talk to? Where did I go? Was it because I went to this particular location? Was it because I talked to this person? Was it because I ate something? And anything I ate that particular day or drank that day, like chai or soda or whatever, this is when I used to drink soda, by the way, I would stop doing that. And I was just like checking everything off the list, and nothing made sense. Nothing was making sense. And I knew I did not want to be on a medication. And this is the next thing that I want to say this in a very important caveated disclaimer way. A lot of people who have a severe depression or severe anxiety disorder, you have a chemical imbalance and you may need to be on medication, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's the whole stigma around it. People are like, I don't want to be on medication. I didn't want to be on medication because I knew that I could tackle this personally, and it was scary and it was frightening, but I wanted to tackle this in a very natural way. But if you feel like you need to be on medication, please talk to a licensed doctor, a therapist, a psychiatrist, someone who can help you through it, okay? For me, I knew that for me to like really understand this, I needed to do it in a natural way, because my personal opinion with this was, if I was to be medicated for this, what I would be doing is just throwing the problem under the rug. Because my entire life, my entire family, my community, everyone that I was around was constantly medicated on different things. My dad with thyroid issues, or someone with high blood pressure, and I just did not want to be medicated. And I knew that if I was medicated, I could never naturally beat this thing, because the medication would take over the pain, and I would constantly feel like this feeling of numbness. And I talked to friends who were going through this, and they were taking medication, and they said that the medication was just making things worse for them in particular ways. And so again, these are 100% my personal opinions. Please take this with a grain of salt. I highly recommend just talk to someone who can help you through your particular situation. But I needed to start figuring out what the heck was going on with me. I needed to take control of the situation because the situation was taking control of me. I knew I had a huge future ahead of me, but I didn't even know where to start. So I started with where I could. And this is where the healing process began. I want to run through the things that I started to do that slowly took a long time, but slowly I started to see some signs of hope. So let's jump into what I started to do at those points when I was in the darkest days of my life. And even though my dad was not understanding, my family wasn't understanding because they had never gone through that. We have never dealt with anxiety or depression or panic attacks in our community, in our family history. But I think we had. Okay, here's the thing. I think we had, but no one was having these conversations. No one was having this dialogue because they didn't know what words to use. They didn't understand the symptoms. And one of my biggest saving graces, and this is really important for you as well, was and is my wife. At that time, Crystal and I were not married, but she has always been the light at the end of my tunnel. When I was going through the darkest of days, I really don't know what I would have done without her, because I would have these really long conversations with her when I was going through the moments when I just couldn't even fall asleep, and we had so many amazing conversations. I was able to really connect with her in an unbelievable way because she, again, was the light at the end of my tunnel. She would tell me if I was like really distilling and really going through every single thing I was going through, when I was saying, over analyzing and, the analysis paralysis situation, she would tell me, it's like, no, Arslan, that is not what is causing it. It's going to be okay. Take a deep breath. She would help me kind of catch my breath and focus on the present moment. And, I'll get to that here in a second. But she, again, I love her so much. And she really has been the grace for me from that day. She's like an angel. I consider her an angel. And even to this day, if I ever have days that are really tough, she knows what I've gone through. She knows the darkest of days. Even a few weeks ago when I had a lot going on, a lot on my plate, I felt a couple symptoms of anxiety, that racing heart. And I told her, I'm like, honey, I feel a little bit of anxiety kicking in. I feel like my heart's racing. And she walked me through it. And by the way, back then, 6 years ago when I had a panic attack, it would take me 3 or 4 weeks to really recover from it, because it was always like the sensations afterwards, they trickle. You know what I'm talking about if you ever had a panic attack. Now, if I have symptoms of anxiety or if I feel something kicking in, I tend to recover from it within 30 to 45 minutes. Okay? Because having a support system is one of the best things ever, and Crystal is my savior. She's been amazing through this whole process, but I still had to battle this on my own. There was a lot of things that I still had to tackle because it was right up here. Back then, I used to say, by the way, people would ask me, what's the scariest place you've ever been? I used to say, the scariest place I've ever been is inside my own head. It's the scariest place I've ever been, because I don't know what's going on up there. Whenever I'm thinking, I'm just like so fearful. I was constantly in a state of fear, a state of being scared. And so the battle was something that I had to go through on my own. And so that's what I was doing. And so here's what happened next. So I started doing the research on my own, and I started figuring out, okay, anxiety is caused when this happens, and panic attack happens when this happens. And what is anxiety disorder? What are panic attacks? What is panic disorder? And I started doing the research, right? And everything kept coming back to movements and meditation or yoga or those sorts. Now, if you are going through panic attack or anxiety, and for someone who doesn't even understand this, there's something really important that a lot of people don't realize, is for someone who is having a hard time going through, like the anxiety and panic attacks, it is very difficult to even do anything like meditation, yoga, or movement. And here's why. Some of the symptoms that I was going through, and the common symptoms are a constant feeling of like you're losing your mind and you're going crazy, a constant feeling of your heart is racing, and literally feeling the heart is racing. My resting heart rate constantly was 100 beats per minute. That is wild, okay? That is just wild, because it's supposed to be at 60 beats per second, at my age, and that's where the resting heart rate needs to be, and my heart was constantly racing. And I constantly felt a numbness throughout my body. There were days where I felt like my entire face was numb. I felt this tingling sensation. I felt like my tongue was numb. I felt like the left side of my body was numb. Again, all these symptoms that correlate to a heart attack, right? But I wasn't having a heart attack. This was just anxiety. And I realized at that time that even though people were saying meditation and movement, it was scary, because when you meditate and when you do yoga, it is very much about centering yourself and being in the present moment and focusing on your breath. I could not focus on my breath because my breath was constantly running out. I felt like oxygen was constantly running out of my body and leaving and not coming back. Oxygen is circulating all the time, right? But I felt like I couldn't even speak. When I was speaking, I felt like my lungs were just collapsing. I couldn't catch my breath. I couldn't talk to people. And then talk about focusing yourself and focusing your breath and, taking deep breaths and doing yoga. That was scary too, because again, you're doing movement related to exercise too. Go out, go for a walk, go for a run. I couldn't do that because anytime I felt my heart rate accelerating even beyond what it already was, I would have a panic attack. Every time I would try to go for a long walk or a long run, I would have a panic attack every single time. And again, my creative brain would be like, okay, it's the walking that's doing it. It's the running that's doing it. And I was so frustrated. I was so frustrated with everything and I could not find out what was going on, right? And so exercise and yoga and meditation were kind of out of the equation at that time. And then the next thing that came up was journaling. I was like, okay, journaling. I've never journaled in my entire life. What is journaling going to do? And that's where the healing really started. Journaling really helped right off the bat. And here's why. A lot of people are like, Arslan, how would journaling help? How would writing your thoughts help? This is how it helps. And I encourage you to practice this. And if you know someone who's going through these issues, these exact same issues that I'm, like unfolding for you, recommend journaling. And this is why it's really important. You can either journal at the end of the night or when the day begins. And what you do is you write about what happened yesterday or what happened today. So I wanted to journal at night. So I would journal and write and by the way, when I say journal, I mean like take a pen, piece of paper and write it. Okay, don't type it out, write it. Literally feel you writing those words. When you write and feel what you're writing, it really connects again with your brain. I would write my frustrations. I would write things that I was going through. I would write my thoughts out. What was I thinking about today? What were my frustrations? Did I have a panic attack? What, just everything. Write it all out. Did I have a good day? Did I have a bad day? How was it? When you write all that out, I journaled every single day for a year. For a straight year, I journaled. And the reason this really helps is a couple weeks went by and I went back and I read what I wrote 2 weeks ago. And it was mind-boggling. How I felt 2 weeks ago was completely different than how I felt that day. I had felt worse 2 weeks ago than I felt that day. And every day was fluctuating. And journaling really taught me that you are going to feel different every single day. And that was the beginning of a healing process, realizing the law of impermanence, okay? Through the Buddhist monks talk about this all the time. Nothing is permanent. Your worst days won't last forever. Your best days won't last forever. Nothing is permanent. Things are constantly changing. It's like the ebb and flow of life. If you've ever been to an ocean, the water comes to the beach, and then it goes back into the ocean. It becomes part of the ocean again. It comes back. That is the ebb and flow of life. Nothing is permanent. It's always changing. Human beings are always trying to control things. We're always trying to control things, all right? Mother Nature is so unique because nature and animals and everything in it are constantly in flow and they know what needs to happen. A bird knows it's a bird. A bird does not try to be an alligator. But us human beings, we're always trying to control things. We're always trying to take bad situations and make them good because we don't understand that things need to unfold in their own way. And as a couple months went by, as I was journaling, I was slowly able to walk a little bit longer walk, and my heart was still racing, but I was able to really take a note of how I was feeling. I would write down, okay, today I walked a half a mile and it wasn't that bad. I started feeling good. And creativity started coming back. And what I realized is the more I created, the more it helped my anxiety. What I mean by that is being in a creative state of mind. For creatives, it's really important to be creative, okay? Let me repeat that. For creatives, it's really important to be creative. Because when you're creative, you're essentially being mindful. You're being in the present moment. You're being here and now. Nothing else matters. And it's very much like being mindful. Mindful meditation teaches you that. So I started creating, and I found myself, the more I created, the more I was able to not really focus on my anxiety and my depression and all these other things. Okay? And then slowly, about a year and a half after my panic attack, my very first one, I decided to go and work out, like really work out. I mean, like, and this is before I got into weightlifting and all this other stuff that I do now, but, just doing some jumping jacks, jogging a little bit, lifting, some kettlebells, whatever I could do. And I started feeling this sense of relief. I started feeling like, okay, I have a little bit more control of my body. And this is where the biggest lesson of my journey with anxiety disorder and panic attacks came, and this is really the caveat of how I was able to overcome a lot of this. As I was starting to meditate more and work out more and journal my thoughts, I realized something, and this is probably the biggest lesson I can teach you from when it comes to how to overcome your anxiety disorder, anxiety attacks, panic attacks. The more you try to control your anxiety, the more you try to push away your panic attacks, the more you try to struggle and attack your depression, the worse it's going to get. There is a saying that what you resist persists. Okay, let me repeat that. This is really important. Please write this down. What you resist persists. I remembered, I went back to my journals and I read what I wrote, and this all made sense. This light bulb moment went off. And I was like, this is the stuff I could not find anywhere. Through all the books that I read, so many books, through all the books I read, through all the websites I went to, through all the videos I watched, this is the one thing I did not find anywhere. And the thing was that you do not need to be fighting your panic attacks. You do not need to be fighting your anxiety disorder. You do not need to be in a battle with your depression. But at the same time, you do not need to let your anxiety disorder fight you. You cannot let the depression fight you. You need to work with it hand in hand, okay? This is really important because at the end of the day, when all of when the dust settles and your wounds start kind of healing up and you look at your anxiety disorder standing right in front of you and you take the mask off, what you're gonna see underneath that mask is a reflection of you. This entire time, the thing that you have been fighting is yourself. You are interconnected with your anxiety, with your depression, with your panic attacks. It is a part of you. And here is the biggest lesson, and this is how I overcame my anxiety. Please write this down. Here I am 6 years later, on the very month that I had my first panic attack. I have an unbelievably successful business. I have an unbelievably successful podcast, an amazing audience of 20,000 plus family members on the Abundant Tribe. I have an amazing wife. We're expecting our first child. We are in our first home. I feel more centered and more connected than I ever could have. I am physically in the best shape of my life. I work out every single day. I'm so in zone. I'm so centered. I can talk without losing oxygen. I'm going through all these things. But here's the thing. The anxiety, the depression, and the panic attacks are still a part of me. And I want them to be. I want them to be. Okay? This is the hardest pill to swallow, and this is something I need you to realize. You do not need to recover from anxiety disorder. You do not need to battle it. It is going to be a part of you, and you need to understand that it is going to be a part of you for the rest of your life, and that is your superhero power, okay? Having anxiety, having depression, all these things, they are your superhero power, because folks that don't like take medication and stuff like that, think of it this way. Your days are going to fluctuate. Some of the days are going to be at 10, some of the days are going to be at like really low, and that's what's really going to teach you. Your biggest success stories, the biggest lessons in your life are going to come through your struggle. The classic Tony Robbins quote that I quote all the time, this isn't happening to you, it's happening for you. Anxiety disorder, I would have never imagined I would have said this 6 years ago, but anxiety disorder is one of the best things that ever happened to me, because it really taught me who I can become. It really taught me who I could become on the other side of all of this darkness. So what I have to do, because I still have days where I'm a little bit anxious. I haven't had an anxiety attack or panic attack in years, but I do have days that are low. I have days that are high. But the days that are low, I go with the flow. I understand that the next day is going to be better. And the days that are great, I understand that it's not going to last forever. Going back to the law of impermanence, nothing lasts forever. Your worst days aren't going to last forever. Your best days aren't going to last forever. You need to be very interconnected with the days that are good, that are bad, and know that you just have to go with the punches, roll with the punches, right? So the days that are really bad, when I feel like my anxiety is kind of like trickling in, if there's a lot of things happening in my world, I literally have to say this out loud. And this is what I want you to start doing as well. And this is the big lesson at the end of this entire story. This is the lesson I want to shout from the mountaintops. This is a lesson that I want everyone to learn. This is a lesson that I want everyone to share. This is what you need to tell your anxiety, because I've said this out loud numerous times. The days that I feel like my anxiety is kicking in. I tell my anxiety that, hey, listen, sounds, by the way, this is going to sound odd, but you have to have the conversation. This is a really important conversation. So I'll tell my anxiety, hey, listen, I love having you here. You are a part of my life. I'm not fighting you. I'm not trying to push you away. You do not need to go away. I do not need to recover from you. You are me. You are a part of me. But listen, because of that, you don't get to fight me. You don't get to, tackle me down. You don't get to put me in an arm bar. You do not get to attack me. You are a part of my life just like I'm a part of you. I'm not resisting you because you are me. Just like that, you cannot try to take control. I'm not trying to take control, and neither can you. You can be here. I'm going to take a deep breath, and you're still going to be here. And I want you to be here because you are a part of my life. I don't want you to go away. You've taught me so many lessons. You are a part of me. We're in this together, but you do not get to control me. You do not get to take the power. You do not get to take the power. Just like I've given the power to you to share, you have to let me share the power with you, okay? There's a lot of different, this is the kind of conversation you have to have with your anxiety because you do not want it to go away. You do not overcome it or recover from it because you're going to be with it for the rest of your life, And this is the truth, and it's not a scary truth. This is like a poetic, beautiful truth. It is, I don't want to use the word life sentence. It's a life partnership. It's a life commitment. It's a life venture. It's a life lesson. It's a life journey. It's being in this together. The more you are in this together, the more you'll understand that you're going to constantly learn every single thing about yourself. Going through anxiety disorder, going through panic attacks, going through depression is like the biggest personal development journey in the world. And you are lucky to experience it. Be in understanding of that. If you are watching this and you just had your first panic attack or you're still going through the process of healing and journey and figuring out what's going on, you are very fortunate and very lucky to be going through this because this is, again, happening for you. It's not happening to you. Anxiety has been one of the best things that happened in my life. I never imagined 6 years ago I would say that, but I'm saying it right now very proudly because it has taught me to be who I am. The person that is on the other side is here and now. I used to say all the time, why is this happening to me? I want to go back to my old self. You don't want to go back to your old self, okay? Because your old self does not understand where you are now. It is a bunch of things that happen in motion, conjunction. Every single thing happened for a reason for you to get to where you were. You don't want to go back to that. You need to continue moving forward in partnership. This life sentence is not a life sentence. This is a life journey, okay? This is a blessing to have. And I mean that with the most sincerity in the world. I'm not saying that just to say it. It really is one of the best things that are going to happen to you. And it's hard to understand this right now. You may be watching this and saying, Arslan, I don't know, man. I don't know. This is so difficult. I can't do it. Just hold on. Hold on and start with the basics. Lay down the foundations. Start journaling. And then slowly, when you're able to, start focusing on your breath. And then slowly, when you're able to, start creating. And then when you get to it, start moving. Those are the 4 things that saved me. Journaling, meditation, creating, and movement. And I encourage you to lay those down as foundations because they're going to help you as well. I know there's a lot that I covered in this episode and I can talk for hours and hours. This could be like a 4-hour episode. But I want you to understand that everything is going to be okay. Not everything is forever. Nothing lasts forever, okay? You will heal, you will get through this, and I promise you're going to turn up on the other side the best version of yourself. Please share this episode or this video with someone who truly needs it because there is someone out there who is literally crying themselves to sleep like I was. Someone who is truly struggling and suffering in silence. Please share this with someone who needs it, a friend, a family member, a colleague, someone who truly needs it, a relative. And then for you, my beautiful friend, if you watch this and listen, please listen as many times as you need and reach out to me. Take a screenshot, send this to me. Let me know that you're watching so I know that you are in the healing process. I'm sending you all my love, everything I have, all my love, my energy, my strength, everything that I have, I'm sending your way, and you're going to do amazing. Thank you for listening to this very special 40th episode of the Abundant Desi podcast. This is, again, only the beginning. We have just started. We're getting closer to the first year anniversary of this movement launching. and we are off to do some amazing things, and I am so excited to have you be a part of this as we move forward. I love you, dost. Have an unbelievable day. I will see you next week on next week's episode. Until then, go out there, be amazing, be abundant, and we will see you soon. Love you, dost.